Hello, good evening, well, end of good afternoon here in Washington, D.C., and welcome all to our webinar for resources for off-campus renters. My name is Christopher Silva, and I'm the Director of Housing at American University. I am joined by several colleagues from different offices, as well as from the district. And we have a great amount of information to share with students and families today. And before we get started, I do want to take a moment to recognize that how sad we are for the fall semester's changes and all the logistics and plans that now have to be readjusted by students and their families because of the incidence of COVID-19, and as well as for the concerns that we have for our students and family members' health and safety during this pandemic. We know that several of you, perhaps all of you, had originally planned for on-campus housing. And then because of, once again, our COVID-19 plans, you had to find new housing for you off campus. And perhaps you attended some webinars with me and other colleagues while we were bringing in off campus landlords and vendors for you to learn about them. And you began making plans on that. And then, and then due to the pandemic, we shifted the learning mode to online, and now you have to once again have to address these your fall housing and your school year housing. And so we know, needless to say, that these we understand that this is a stressful situation and frustrating perhaps, and we want to provide information and support to you during this time with as many resources that we have available, both in-house and with external partners. And so this is the focus of our webinar today, to share these resources with you. I'll go ahead and mention to you what we're going to be doing. And so we will be doing some introductions. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves in a second. And then we're going to be talking about what resources we have available, and then going to detail about leasing in DC. And then last, we have time for Q&A. And please know that during this session, we have prepared with many different resources, including reviewing questions that you've submitted in the webinar registration. So we will try to address many of the questions that you have as we are explaining, and then as well as we'll be in the background answering questions via text that you've been asking. So thank you again for being here today, and please know that we're doing our best and all that we can to assist students and families during this time. So I'll pass it over to my colleague Martin Sagendorf so that he can take us on.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Martin Sagendorf, and I'm the Associate Director for Housing Assignments and Communications for Housing Residence Life at American University. So honored to be with all of you tonight, and I potentially have been in contact with many of you, as one of my functions is also supporting students with our off-campus student services page. So in moving with our introductions, I will turn it over to Steve to introduce himself.
Great, thank you, Martin. I'm Stephen Dudek. I'm with the Office of Tenant Advocate. My title is Education Outreach Program Coordinator, as well as an attorney advisor. So I'll be sharing hopefully some helpful information for you guys later on in this presentation, and thank you for having me.
Thanks. Gwendolyn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Gwendolyn Brown. I am an Associate General Counsel in AU's Office of General Counsel, and I am here to answer any kind of legal questions that you may have in general. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions that you need answered.
Great. And we'll get to hear from all of our presenters as we move through our time together tonight. Chris, if you can progress us 2 slides, that'd be great. And then one more. Yep, perfect. If any of you have already been in contact with us, which I think many of you potentially have, we've been working very hard, including last week, to prepare as many resources and supports that AU could put together in advance for students, and then have been continuing to adapt those based on feedback that we've received, and we've been able to make some connections and keep things moving for all of you. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through just a summary of what those are. Some of these you may have seen in the past if you've taken a look at our webpage, but we want to make sure everybody is aware of those. So as we transition to our next slide, I want to bring everyone's attention to the Housing and Residence Life homepage. So if you were to visit our homepage, this is what you would see right at the top, which is our announcements section. So we've really been working hard to make these resources available and transparent to anyone who's looking for them. You'll see right away that there's the off-campus students section and then the sublet off-campus section. We'll talk about both of those as we go forward, but we're going to start with our off-campus student services webpage, which we revamped in advance of last Thursday's announcement. Chris, if you can move to the next slide. Great. So if you come onto our off-campus student services page, we've, like I said, taken that page and adjusted it to provide some different resources for folks who have questions about leases in the area. Many of those resources have been available since last week, and actually some of them have changed all the way up until today. So I'll walk you through what those are. So first up, we have a document on there, which is the Office of Tenant Advocates Rates and Resources document. So this was something that we had shared with some students, I think back in March 16th, when the first announcement from AU had gone out about closing campus for the spring, and then it's been adapted since. So that document is available there. It's something that Stephen will talk more about shortly, but that has been available and will continue to be there for your quick resource as you move forward. Additionally, we expect that from our research that many of our students live in the DC area, specifically in the District of Columbia. However, if you happen to live in Virginia or Maryland, we tried to collect a number of web pages for different government agencies to support you. So you'll see some of those there. Again, you'll have to pay attention to where specifically you're renting. So if you're not in Montgomery County, Maryland, the resource we have there may not apply to you, and you would need to do a little other research. But again, we put some of those together as a quick connection for you there. So those are also listed there. One of the other pieces that we've heard a lot from students is, hey, what can AU do for me to help me communicate with my landlord or property manager to support a conversation and talk about my needs and theirs as well based on our lease. So one of the things that we put together very quickly and listed on our webpage is our notice to DC Metro landlords and property managers. On the side of the screen here is a screenshot of that. So we've provided that on our webpage. So if you're in communication with your property manager, you can share that link and say, hey, here's a document from American University that explains specifically what happened and gives some context to the questions that you're asking if you're looking to adjust or end a lease outside of what had originally been agreed to. So that's one resource that we have available to you. And again, you have access to that link to share it. It's a public web page. Next up is our link to our off-campus posting site. So we've always had this off-campus posting site. And generally what it is it's a resource for students who are coming to the area to search for housing, and different property managers and landlords in the area can post on there, and only students with an American University email address can access that web page. So that's something that we've always had, but we've worked very closely with the company that provides that for us in the last few days, including I had a few phone calls this morning to get a few pieces wrapped up. We've had questions from students about, I would like to sublet my property. Where can I connect with other students or others in the area who might be interested in taking that sublet? So with that in mind, if you haven't created an account with that page, it's very simple. You just need your American University email and you'll be able to access that for free. And as soon as you get onto that site, there's a step-by-step sublet listing guide, and we have instructions on our resources page for you to follow, and you can post a sublet within a matter of minutes. I will acknowledge that there was a fee initially for that, and basically that fee really went to the company who provides the service. And in a lot of ways, any fees we have on that site are just to make sure that we're getting quality properties who are very interested in reaching out to students on there. But we removed that fee because we knew it was a hindrance, and it's not intended for our students normally, but we know the site is now being used by our students to list. So that should be gone as of today. If anyone runs into any issues with that, by all means, you can reach out to me, and my contact information will be at the end. And as soon as you go on there and you hit submit with the listing, it goes live. We also took off our approval status, where normally I have to approve them all, but for sublets, they're going to go right to live. So you have access to that to move as quickly as you need. So again, those are some of the things that we've been working hard on to get set up for you. And again, that is adapted all the way up until this morning. So if you haven't been on our webpage today, please go back and take a look. We've continued to update that, and I will do that with any other resources that become available going forward. And then the last piece to know about that page is this webinar that we're on right now will be recorded and will be hosted there should you want to refer back to anything in the future or take a look at the slides that we're presenting today. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to cover content from the DC Office of the Tenant Advocate.
Great, thank you, Martin. And do I have the option to share the screen now? Here we go. Let's see. Can everyone see it, or did I? Everyone can see my screen? Yes, okay, cool. Okay, all the different technological different things. So the biggest thing that I want everyone to know is that the Office of Tenant Advocate is here to help. We are an independent government agency that provides free legal advice as long as you're a DC tenant, okay? So anything that deals with any landlord-tenant law issue in the District of Columbia, you can contact our office and speak to an attorney advisor or a case manager. We do limited representation. Excuse me, it's all based on demand, but you'll actually get your answers questioned, and we'll point you in the right direction on how to resolve the dispute with your landlord. And to say, with COVID-19, we've had some unique situations that we sometimes don't know the answers, and we'll get you the answers for that. So the biggest thing to know, as you can see here, is our hotline, the 202-719-6560. That is operational Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. Typically what it is you call, you leave a voicemail, and then within a 24-hour, 48 business hours, you'll receive a call back from one of the attorney advisors to speak and give you that issue. So that is the number one thing to know about, and it's free. So please capitalize on this free service, especially if it's to review a lease, if it's to review a buyout agreement, just to make sure that everything is in your protection. If you have questions on negotiating with your landlord, which we'll definitely cover in this predicament that many of you are in, we are a resource to help you. So definitely call us. You can, if you're having trouble getting calls back, please talk to Martin, and Martin can speak to me, and I'll definitely follow up with you. I am the Education Outreach Program Coordinator, so I come out and, well, now virtually come out and do these presentations. But before I came into that role, I am a licensed attorney in the district as well, so I can provide service. So let's see. So the couple of things, I just want to get to this page right here. So the biggest thing to know, that if you signed a lease, that you are still responsible to pay rent, regardless of COVID-19. So if you signed a lease and you plan to move in on August 1st and you didn't move in because now AU has said we're not doing on-campus classes, you are still responsible for rent for August 1st and throughout the duration of your tenancy. There is no legislative action that has canceled rent or provide a breaking of the lease option for tenants. And in my personal opinion, I think that's very highly unlikely, because the government doesn't want to meddle too far into contracts with private citizens and private companies. They have done a lot of protections, and we're going to cover a couple of those highlights. The first thing to know is that no eviction can happen during the public health emergency plus 60 days. Now, what I mean about the public health emergency is the mayor has an order saying that the public health emergency is in effect and is actually into effect until October 9th. And she has started it from March 11th and has extended it through October 9th. And depending on the trend of COVID-19, which what we're seeing in the nation, we'll probably see it be extended. The biggest thing to know about that is you can't be evicted during the public health emergency and 60 days thereafter, okay? So if the public health emergency ends on October 9th, you really can't be evicted until, or have the eviction process start until December, beginning of the year, and then also you have to factor in a whole slew of things, the core operations, things of that. So I do want you to know, if you don't pay your rent, you cannot be evicted, you cannot be forcibly removed from your property. The landlord has to go through the eviction process, and if there's questions, I'll cover that. A couple of other things to know is that the landlord can't increase your rent. So for example, if you rented a unit and it was a rent control unit and they tax or put a vacancy increase in it from March 11th to now, that's an illegal rent increase. And you may be able to negotiate, say, hey, my rent should be lower. So that may be something you want to talk to previous tenants to see, hey, how much did you pay your rent? Because they shouldn't be upping the rent for each unit. A couple of other things to do are services that are available. There's utility payments. So if you're struggling to pay utilities, you'll be able to contact Pepco, Washington Gas, DC Water to make a payment plan. The biggest thing to know is that with COVID-19, a lot of the legislative changes that DC Council enacted sort of puts a pause on things, okay? You're still responsible to pay your rent, you're still responsible to pay utilities, but there are different avenues to prolong and push it back until you know what's happening for sure. And the other thing that I did want to mention to you is that if you're renting a unit in DC and you're paying rent and you've been affected by COVID-19, or say your parents who are a co-signer on the lease are affected by COVID-19 and you can't pay your rent, your landlord does have to give you a rent payment plan, okay? They do have to make sure that, and I'm going to scroll up to here, the rent payment plan. And so they have to allow you or make a deal with you. The biggest issue with this rent payment plan is a lot of tenants don't know when their next paycheck is coming in, and they don't want to agree to anything until they know that they can satisfy the terms of that rent payment plan. But the biggest thing to know is that if you moved into your unit and say for the month of September you have no income, you can't pay your rent, first thing, communicate that with your landlord. Don't wait for the last moment. Have that open relationship. And second thing, use this document. This document is both on our website as well as on the website that Martin shared. So use this, print it out, contact our hotline, because they are supposed to offer you a rent payment plan, especially if you were affected by COVID-19, either financially affected by COVID-19 or if you actually contracted the virus and that affected your income as well. So I just want you to know that resource is available. Please read through it. It also at the bottom updates you about what court systems are doing, if they're hearing cases, which right now they're only hearing emergency cases. So it is a vital document that we constantly updated. I've been on vacation for the last week and a half, so I'll have to check our website to make sure the current form that you're seeing and that is on Martin's web page is on our web page. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is sort of some type of scenarios. Now, can everyone see this Word document? Yes, okay. It's not covered by the videos, right? No, okay.
No, it's okay.
So I've been working with all off-campus housing offices probably since this COVID-19 has hit. And this is an updated document that I'm still waiting just for the authorization to disseminate. So when I get that okay, which I'm hoping I will sometime tonight or first thing tomorrow, I will send a copy to Martin and he'll be able to put it on the webpage. If you're interested, we also have a OTA listserv that you can get all the updates on the law or OTA events. That you can just put your email in the chat section, hopefully, and I can add you to that listserv. A couple of things that I want to bring to your attention, and this may answer some of your questions that you put in, is what do? You signed the lease, you were intending to attend classes on campus. Due to COVID-19 just continuing to be a pain in the butt, everyone's acting accordingly, and now we're not having on-campus classes. There is a legal term called frustration of purpose that may be available to you guys. And this was definitely available to tenants at the beginning of the last academic year because no one had any idea that this was going to happen. The difficulty of using frustration of purpose now, especially if you signed the lease after March 11th when the mayor declared a public health emergency, is, as you see in the bolded thing, is that there could have been a chance that American University is able or was going to cancel on-campus classes. And hopefully you were able to have that discussion with your landlord before you signed the lease and had some type of term in your lease stating, if American University cancels on-campus classes, this is how we are going to deal with our relationship as a landlord-tenant. If you didn't have that conversation, it is okay, because there are some options available to you. Not all of them are great options, and some of them are going to require some buy-in from the landlord. Okay, so the top document sort of explains the frustration of purpose, but I really want to focus on sort of the 4 available options on what you should do. The first thing that you may want to consider is continue to move into your unit, pay your rent. One, because we don't know if you'll be able to have classes in the spring and you may like your unit, and so to preserve your tenancy and to maintain your tenancy, you can move in, pay your rent, no liability, no wonders, just continue to pay your rent. That is one available option to you guys. Some of them may not want to do that because why am I going to move down to DC if I can attend classes here online in Massachusetts or in New York or wherever you are in the country or in the world? So why would I do that? The second thing is you can try to sue your landlord in court or get a declaratory judgment for whether they have the ability or the court has the ability to view that your lease should be voided or terminated. That isn't the best option either for 2 reasons. One is the court isn't hearing any emergency cases or isn't hearing non-emergency cases until after August 14th. And they actually may extend that deadline even more. And so we're going to have a backlog of cases. And while this backlog is happening, you're still responsible for your rent. The second thing is you're putting your faith into the court's hands. And the court may disagree with you, and you ultimately may still be liable for the rest of your rent. And so that is something that you may want to get an attorney for and have extra costs. So we just want to have that avenue available to you guys, but again, it's not the best. I would say the best avenue for you is to communicate with your landlord. Try to talk out with your landlord. The first thing that you should do before you hopefully signed it was read over your lease. But before you talk to your landlord, review your lease again. See if there was any provisions in your lease saying sort of buying you out or how to break a lease early. If that clause is in your lease, then that is what you have to abide by to end your lease early. If your lease is silent on a breaking of the lease clause or moving out early, then this is where you have to negotiate with your landlord. Okay, the landlord, of course, does not have to negotiate with you, but you want to talk to them, okay, or see what available options are, okay? If you get to a buyout agreement or plan, this is where you should always have something in writing and with the signature of both you and the landlord. So no one can go back on their word, and you have a document saying that this is the agreement that we come up to. So how would you, some tips of negotiating? You could use your security deposit as a chip to say, hey, I'll forfeit my right to the security deposit if you agree to allow me to break the lease early without any penalty or clause. It may be sometimes they'll ask you to pay an additional month's rent or 2 months rent for you to break out the lease, to break from the lease. Again, it's what you're comfortable with. You don't have to agree to it. Again, use OTA as your friend, okay? If you have an agreement and you want someone to review it with you before you sign it, call us, email it to us, we'll review it, we'll say that looks great, or hey, here's some pointers or things that you want to think. Another thing is subletting and assignment, okay? This is also where you need to review your lease as well, because the landlord does have the right to say in DC that he does not authorize any sublet or assignment. The typical phrase or lease clause is that they do not allow sublet or assignment without the written authorization or consent of the landlord. Okay, couple of things to know about subletting and assignment, or the big differences. Okay, with subletting, you still have privity of contract with the landlord. So anything that your subtenant does, so if they don't pay their rent, or if they break the terms of the lease, the landlord can hold you responsible, okay? The other thing to know is when you're a subtenant, you are actually a sub-landlord in the eyes of the law in DC. So therefore, if you want to move back into the unit, you're going to have to abide by the eviction statute. And if you talk to any DC landlord, they're going to say it's very difficult to get tenants out. On top of that, you're going to have to deal with the public health emergency. So you want to be able to get any tenant out until the public health emergency ends, plus that 60 days after, and then you'll have to follow through the court process. So by the time your tenancy ends, you may not be able to move back in. So if you're thinking about subletting, you want to have those thoughts, you want to have those conversations with an attorney on what they could foresee could happen. Assignment is a little bit different. It's when you don't have privity of contract with the landlord, and you basically, the assignee is stepping into your shoes and fulfilling the remaining terms of the tenancy. If it was me, I would always say do assigning, because then you know that you have no longer any financial or contractual liability to the landlord. The landlord, can reasonably deny an application for poor credit, poor rental housing history, but he can't unreasonably deny. He can't say, you know what, he's a New England Patriots fan, he has a Boston accent, we're not going to allow him to live into the unit. He can't do that. He has to have a reasonable action, a reasonable reason to deny a sublet application or assignee application. And the last option available to you guys is abandoning the property, okay, which is the worst nuclear option thing that you don't want to do, that we would advise against you doing, but you may get to that point with your landlord, and we understand that. What I do want to talk about is the landlord's duty to mitigate, or the consequences of abandoning your unit. So say if you do abandon your unit, you no longer pay rent, you moved everything out of your unit, the landlord can still hold you responsible for the remaining terms of the lease. All of that rent, they can hold you. Yes, they have a duty to mitigate their damages. What does that mean? That means they have to post and advertise for the unit. They have to have prospective tenants come in, see the unit. They have to do everything in their power to re-rent that unit, okay? Now, if they do everything in that power and still can't re-rent the unit, you're on the hook for all of that rent. Also, and say a scenario that they are able to re-rent the unit, but it's at a $250 discount from what you were paying in your rent, you're responsible for that difference, okay? And this is why we advise tenants not to abandon their unit, because it can lead to a lot of liability, and probably you're going to be seeing your landlord in court, if not in small claims court like Judge Judy, or in civil court. So it's definitely don't do that. If you're at your wit's end with your landlord, contact us, contact American University, and see if we can help you guys. Again, as you can see at the bottom, contact our number. If you are seeking someone to help you negotiate, do talk to an attorney advisor. Again, we only have a limited staff. We only have 6 attorneys on staff to cover the whole entire district. And what we don't want to do is provide poor service to all the tenants. So you can definitely ask to represent and fill out a representation request form. And then again, if you have any concerns, you can reach out to me, ask Martin for my email, and I'm more than happy to get back. But that's my presentation. And if you guys have any questions, or Martin or Gwen, anything you guys want to add, please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And what we're going to do, just kind of on a technical end, is we'll switch back to our presentation in just a moment, so you'll all have that visual. Quinn, was there anything that you wanted to share at this point before we jump into questions?
Absolutely. I think that Steve made some really good points. One thing I will always advise is to take a look, go back and reread your lease, because there are some terms that are common to a lease, and then there are some terms that may not necessarily be common, but your landlord may have added to the lease. So no 2 leases are necessarily the same. So it's always good to go back, read your lease so that you know what's in it, and particularly look at the section, if there is a section under termination rights or any kind of notice of termination, and make sure that you can abide by that. Just generally, it's generally, if anytime you're gonna, or anytime you have to modify or terminate your lease, it's really good to let the landlord know, and see if you can engage in some dialogue with your landlord to see about things you can possibly work out. I think everyone has been very stressed during this time of COVID, and I don't think that it's going to be a shock to any landlord in the district, knowing that many of the schools are going to be offering online courses, in addition to the elementary, middle school, and high schools in the DMV area. So I hope that the landlords and the property managers out there are going to be understanding and flexible. Just know that even though we're online this semester, we do not know about next semester. So perhaps instead of asking for a termination, you could maybe even modify the start date, which could be an option there. Or you could, if you know anyone or are willing to advertise the place for a sublease, you have to, again, check your lease to make sure that a sublease is permitted under the lease. But lots of landlords don't mind subleasing because they really do just want the unit rented. But again, check your lease. Another thing that I can say is you can even offer up your security deposit, if you've already paid one, as sort of a termination fee to your landlord. I know that money is tight for students as it is for lots of people, and so you may want to have that as sort of your last ditch effort, because I remember when I was a student, I wanted I had plans for my security deposit when I gave it to the landlord. So so with that in mind, you might want to leave that as kind of in your back pocket to offer up if nothing else works. But I do hope and believe that the landlords will be understanding in this type of situation, because it's not just students at American, the students at Georgetown, students at GW are all having the same issues. So like I said, this is not going to be a surprise, but make sure you communicate as best as you can with your landlord. I think most landlords appreciate getting a heads up before there's any kind of action taken. You have to remember there's two parties in this situation. It's you as the tenant and the landlord as the owner as the landlord. And so just like you wanted a place to stay, you gave a deposit and expected the landlord to have that place available for you. In turn, the landlord is expecting that, you know, he leased it to you and that you would stay in the premises. And unfortunately, due to COVID and the increasing numbers, the university is leaning on the side of caution and saying, you know, for the health and safety and welfare of our students, we think it's best to pivot and go a different direction, which we certainly understand. I do think it was the best decision to make. But I know that although these are difficult times and this is a difficult situation for you as students and as tenants, I do think it's something that you'll be able to work out and that we as a university community will be able to get through it. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I did see a couple messages that my sound has been a little hard to hear, so I'll do my best to kind of speak up a little bit. It's actually my third webinar this week, so it may also be my voice. But with that in mind, by all means, if anyone's having trouble, please feel free to share that and I'll continue to adjust on my end. Moving to our next slide, we're going to shift to our Q&A portion, which we know is very important. And I do see quite a few questions have come in while we've been presenting as well. Chris and I have been doing our best to answer those as quickly as we can. And we'll also reiterate some of those just for everyone else to hear in case we didn't publish those for everyone to see, which may be the case. So in advance of that, we're going to look at the questions that you all submitted when you were registering for the webinar. I compiled those on the next couple slides, so we'll jump into that one, the first one of those right now, which the question that came in was, Chris, if you can progress the slide, can I break my lease without getting an extra punishment fee? I do believe Stephen has touched on this already, and probably with slightly different language. Stephen or Gwendolyn, is there anything you would want to add to that one?
I think just the only thing to add is just review your lease. If your lease has a termination clause, an early termination clause, that's really what you have to abide by, because when you sign the lease, you agree to everything in your lease. So they can't add any extra punishment fee, or they can't withhold your security deposit as a punishment of you vacating your or breaking your lease early. So they shouldn't be charging you a extra punishment fee. And just what Gwendolyn was saying is that a lot of landlords are in this situation, know that a lot of tenants are receiving these hardships, especially college students as well. And so they should see this coming as well. Probably where I see a lot of the issues is the smaller landlord who may using this money as a way to either have a livelihood or pay their mortgage payments for the building as well. Those are probably where we see sort of the major conflicts between tenants and landlords.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
And
sorry.
again, let me just jump in and add that definitely know what's in your lease. Know if there is some sort of termination fee, then that should be in there. Do not listen if a landlord is telling you that there are extra fees, because whatever fees or penalties have to be in the lease. If it's something that's not in there, it doesn't apply to you, because the lease is you have to look at the four corners of the document, and that is the written memorialization of what you and the landlord have agreed to abide by. So definitely look at your lease, know what's in it, and go from there.
Great, thank you both so much. So the next question that we received in advance was, how do I find off-campus housing in the DMV area? So this is a question that's a little bit different than kind of our focus so far, which has been on folks who are looking to either adjust or end a lease that they have now. But we have also been getting questions from students who are looking to live in the area. So just to reiterate back to one of my earlier points, we do have our off-campus housing posting site, and that's available to anyone with an American.edu email address. So that is one resource for anyone who's looking, and we'll talk a little bit more about this because I see a few questions that have come in, but again, as a student, you can certainly also list on there if you have a sublet or other, or if you're looking to have someone take over your lease, as Stephen was talking about. That is also a resource where you can post there, and when you get onto that site, there is an option when searching to put on a filter for sublet. So if your peers at AU have put on that same filter, when they posted their listing, you would be able to apply that when you're searching and potentially connect with a student that way to take over a lease or sublet. So that is a resource that we want to share up front. So our next question is, this is kind of one where I took a few questions that have come in, and I see a few similar coming in now, is will AU offer financial support to students who are looking to break a lease? So to that question specifically, that's not something that AU is able to do. However, one of the things that we're doing to support you, in addition to the webpage, is certainly this webinar, and we do hope that some of this will be helpful and give you some guidance, and also connect you to a very important resource, which is the Office of Tenant Advocacy, or Advocates. Office of Tenant Advocacy. Yeah, sorry. So you have that connection, and that is something that we wanted to bring up here to share with all of you. And I know this is very challenging. There's not a whole lot I can say to that question if that's your expectation, but again, we're hoping that by empowering you with information, that this puts you in the best place to have those conversations, to be aware of your lease, and to negotiate based on what your needs are. And again, considering the unknown of the spring at this point, keeping that option is something to think about as well. So that is just something to be transparent about there. I did see a couple questions come in as it related to financial aid and a lease off campus. So we will touch on that, which has potentially some implications to that question. And then the final piece, which we've also gotten a few questions about in advance of this webinar, was will there be on-campus spring semester housing? So to kind of the comments earlier that we referenced, our hope is that, we're sad, we wanted to be there with all of you. As much as I enjoy working in my apartment, we really want to be back on campus. That is something that if you've seen any of the other webinars this week, President Burwell, our Vice President Fonta'a, they've all stressed that, and that is absolutely the case. So that will be something that if anyone is interested who's with us today, we will be following up with more information on our webpage. We're expecting more of those details to come out in early November at the latest. But we know that if someone is looking for on-campus housing, that is the next important step. So more to come there. But obviously, given the announcement last week, we want to make sure that we've had time to take a look at the scenario that will be coming for the spring, and make sure that we're planning with that in mind, as we've been doing our best all along. So our next piece is, so I did want to also acknowledge this before we get into other questions that have just come in, is, we've had a variety of questions that were about healthcare and other non-housing related questions that came in advance. So these are all really important, and I know, since the announcement went out last Thursday, and even in advance of that, it's been, a lot of information for people to digest, to understand, and to make decisions based on. So one of the resources that I did also want to share with all of you is that if you go to the Office of Campus Life, or OCL, you can just search OCL American University, should take you right to their page. That is a web page where as many of the webinars that are planned are going to be listed, and then the recordings are also going to be there. So I was on 2 webinars, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. Those are already both listed there if you'd like to watch those. And then there was one last night, like I said, with President Burwell and Vice President Aw and a few other folks from financial aid, student accounts, and academics. So I want to be very cautious to answer questions from other units, just because I want to make sure we're informing you all as accurately as possible. But with that in mind, you do have access to that. And then also on the screen is the american.edu/coronavirus. That is the web page that is constantly being updated by the university to share about what campus operations will look like for the fall, what will academics look like, If someone has questions about adjusting classes or making connections with certain offices, that is a place that is regularly updated and is available to. If you just go to any American University webpage, there will be a red banner that also will link you directly to that. So you'll see that pretty regularly if you've been on our webpage. So next, we're going to jump over to our questions that have been coming in. I grab a sip of water. So there's been a variety of questions that have come in related to some of the things that I said earlier, which is, where is that message to landlords or property managers? Where will the recording of this webinar live? And where is the document that Stephen was sharing with us earlier? So all of that, if you go to the American University Housing and Residence Life homepage, right under our announcements, you'll see it's the second bullet point, takes you to our off-campus student services webpage. Everything that I've talked about and everything that we have as resources will continue to be listed there. We'll continue to update that. So as a blanket answer, all of it will live there. And that's where you can also find the link to go directly to our off-campus posting site. One of the next questions that came in, let me just grab it. Stephen and Quentin, I'll probably see if either of you have any preference on this one. So the question is, would not getting renter's insurance, and then in parentheses, a quote, incurable breach, void a lease for an apartment that I have not moved into yet? I also dropped it in our chat if that's helpful to visualize the question, but again, I'll read it again. So would not getting renter's insurance void a lease for an apartment that I have not moved into yet?
So that's a great question. I think there's a couple of follow-up questions that I would ask, so I definitely would recommend the student to contact our OTA hotline, such as when was his move-in date, has he put in the first month's rent down, a security deposit. But ultimately, what DC does, or the DC statute that covers evictions, which is 42-3505.01, is they only have 10 statutory reasons to evict you. And one of them is breach of contract, and that's the B section. What they have to do, though, is have to issue a 30-day notice to correct or cure to you. And in that, they will have to identify your lease violation, the clause that you violated, and how to cure that violation. And curing that violation has to be reasonable. They can't say that you can't move in. It would be for you to get renter's insurance. Now, you should always get renter's insurance, regardless of whether it's in your lease or not. Just because you don't know what will happen, you don't know the building, and you want to protect yourself. But say if you move into this unit and you don't get renter's insurance, they can issue a 30-day notice to correct or cure. But what will happen, though, is they can't take you the next step. So if you don't get renter's insurance within those 30 days to cure, they're sort of handcuffed by the public health emergency, saying that they can't evict you plus the 60 additional days thereafter. But I wouldn't chance that. I would get renter's insurance, one, because there's always building issues, and if your building floods and you need money to replace your property, if you need money to get into a hotel or an Airbnb until they fix your unit, that is why renter's insurance is covered. I would say DISB, the Department of Insurance, Security, and Banking, has a great list of all companies that offers renter's insurance, and you can definitely combine it with your car insurance or other insurance that you have. Unfortunately, since I work for a government agency, I can't direct you to a certain company, but ultimately you should get renter's insurance, and in regards to the answer is that they should issue a 30-day notice to correct or cure if they believe that you're in violation of the lease.
Great, thank you. So for our next question, we did have a few questions about, is there a trades page for students to share and take over leases? So again, I'll just reference you back to the Housing and Residence Life homepage, and right under the announcements, I believe it's the third announcement, is about the ability to search for and post a sublet or a lease to take over. So there's some information there, as well as when you go into the off-campus posting website, you'll see a step-by-step guide on how to do that as well. I will acknowledge that our off-campus posting site has been incredibly active over the summer, and certainly it is a really great resource, and it is only available to American University students. But the sub-note to that is that it's only available to American University students. So again, if you do have permission working with your lease and your landlord or property manager to host a sublet or to share the opportunity to take over your lease, I would definitely encourage using other platforms outside of what we formally recognize. There's not anything that we specifically endorse, but I think many of you, searching for apartments have likely come across some of those platforms. We also know there's a variety of social media groups that students share together as well. So again, always be cautious, with what you share online and working with others. But again, I do want to acknowledge the perk of our webpage, but also some of the limitations in terms of who has access to it. So one of the next questions was about financial aid and renting off campus. So I'm going to be cautious on answering this one because it's not my area of expertise. But two of the webinars I was on this week were with a financial aid staff member. So I feel fairly knowledgeable to give you a basic answer there. So if you have financial aid with American University, nothing with your financial aid specifically would have changed as a result of the announcement last week. Really, the only thing that would change is that if you reached out to the university and shared, I'm staying at home or I'm living somewhere where now I no longer have cost, that would then result in financial aid adjusting your aid. But again, they're not going to do that without you acknowledging that to them to then have them take that action. So with that in mind, financial aid, from my understanding, calculates aid off of the cost of a double traditional space on campus for any student, be it that they live on campus or rent off campus in the DMV area. So to acknowledge that up front, it's just about $5,000 is what they calculate off of. That may or may not match what an off-campus lease looks like, but again, if you're working with financial aid, you should have a lot of this information already. And with that in mind, if you go to their homepage, there's an option to search by your name to find your specific financial aid counselor. And they stressed in a webinar last night that they're working to get back to people and really have a personal conversation with you. So again, take what I said with a slight grain of salt, but that is my kind of general understanding of that and is a resource to you if you have been working with financial aid in the past. So I'm going to shift over and take a peek at any other questions. Chris, if there's any that are standing out to you, feel free to jump on as well. I will acknowledge that I do see a few that are about some specific properties. And I do also know there's a few folks who have emailed into Housing and Residence Life in the last couple of days. I will be getting back to you shortly. I'll try to do some of that tonight. I apologize if I didn't get back to you yet. But one of the questions that's come up, and turn this to our presenters, is we've heard from a few students that they live in a property that is not sharing that they're open to any flexibility. And I know we had kind of talked earlier that we hope that that will be the case, but that may not always be how landlords or property managers are feeling. So some of these are properties that students have acknowledged that they know have many other AU students and potentially other university students in them. And so the question has kind of come up in the sense of, if I'm reading it correctly, is there any power in a negotiation or having some of those conversations kind of as a unified body? So I'll turn that over to the two of you if you have any thoughts.
So yes, there's in DC, you're actually allowed to create a tenant association. So especially in these big buildings, you can create a tenant association. And what that basically is a voice for the whole entire building. And if you know that, say, 50% of the building is American University students, you may want to have a tenant association to cover the benefits of the AU students and negotiate. Now, the only concern with that is that the landlord individually contracted with each of the tenant, and they may not want to get into discussions with the tenant association because you individually signed the lease not as a tenant association, but as the individual person. So in the sense, I think that you should organize, but you need to have some understanding or expectations, reasonable expectations on how things are going to work out. if there's any pressure that the American University can apply to these landlords, because I assume these landlords have a working relationship, knowing that they'll always have American University students coming to them due to their proximity in class. I think that's sort of a conversation. It's finding those negotiation tactics, saying, hey, we as a student body, if we're all freshmen or sophomore, thinking outside the box, if you're not allowed to break us the lease, this may be bad business for you. We understand that this may put you in a hole, but we're going to talk to our friends, we're going to talk to our parents, we're going to talk to our school and say, hey, everyone, let's think again on whether we want to rent at this apartment. So you could kind of play hardball with that. I would definitely recommend that if there's specific buildings, to reach out to me through Martin. Am I able to put my email in the chat box? Will that go out to everyone? So I'll put my email so we can definitely identify that buildings, and maybe we can assist you guys with some type of negotiation, just because I think if it's a building-wide issue, it's something our office would want to be involved with. And the other thing that I would recommend is talking to your DC council member. I believe American University is in Ward 3, so that's Mary Chay's office. And the DC Council has been in contact with our legislative director about this issue. My legislative director believes that it's on their radar, but they're very cautious on getting involved in a contractual dispute between two private parties. But I think that's also an available option, to say, hey, 50 units in this building needs to break their lease because there's no on-campus classes. Is there anything that DC Council can enact or get involved in? So I definitely say use us as a resource to either help organize or help maybe fight the good fight for you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I do want to acknowledge that we're getting pretty close to time, and I am, I'm very glad to see that our chat is particularly busy and a variety of really good questions. I do just want to acknowledge, kind of to add on to one piece that Stephen shared, is that at this point, we've talked as a university. We don't have specific relations or relationships with specific property management companies or properties. So that is not something specifically that American University is looking to take direct action, because at the end of the day, we are not able to tell a property what to do. But again, that is the purpose of this webinar, is to help empower you all. And then we also, as I acknowledged before, on our off-campus student services page, we do have that note to students or note to landlord and property managers that you're welcome to share as a piece to have some of that dialogue. So again, a lot of really good questions, some particularly long. So I do want to stress as we get to our last slide, is that a variety of them are very specific. So again, feel free to continue reaching out to Housing and Residence Life, and specifically the offer, if you are a DC renter, to OTA and Stephen, so we can continue to share that contact information and work with you the best that we can. So we'll continue to update that webpage if anything else changes. And again, you'll be communicating primarily with me if you reach out to Housing and Residence Life. So you're welcome to address any emails or chats to Martin, and I'll connect with you as quickly as I can. With that in mind, we are right at 7 o'clock, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time and consider it there. So we do thank everybody. We'll get a list of the questions that came in, and if there's anything else we can preemptively add to the webpage, we will do that. But again, feel free to certainly follow up with us as well. And we just again want to thank all of our presenters for spending their evening with us. We want to thank all of you for your time as well and joining us. We know this is definitely a difficult time. Thank Cole for your assistance in all the technology. And definitely, again, please reach out to us, be safe, and we wish you and your families all the best. And thank you so much, and have a good night.